My husband, I have to credit him. He's a genius. I love him. He made a lot of money. And he said to me something like, well, you either have power or you take power. Nobody gives it to you. And that actually helped me also come up with this idea of using women's economic power.
Did you know the average person will work 90,000 hours in their lifetime? What if you could use those hours to find fulfillment and become a disruptor for good? Welcome to the Work That's Worth It podcast. I'm Georgie Enthoven, and I'm here to demonstrate that an ambitious, meaningful, and rewarding career is not just a dream, it's achievable. Each episode will dive into conversations with global change makers who've cracked the code on combining income and impact. If you've ever felt like you were torn between a paycheck and your purpose, or maybe you simply yearn for more purpose, you're going to be exposed to the ambitious humans who have done it themselves. Ready to make your work worth it? Let's get started. Amy Willard-Cross is an ambitious woman on a mission in the later stage of her career, proving that any time is a good time for impact work. Today, she's the founder of Gender Fair, the first consumer rating system for gender equality, which produces ratings on brands, colleges, B2B vendors, and not-for-profits so people can align their dollars with their value of equality. She was named as a global thinker by Foreign Policy for her work in economic girl power, and she's on a mission to help people see how their money equals power and how we can all use economic power to create more fairness in the world by spending, investing, donating with a gender and racial lens. Hi, Amy. So lovely to have you on the Work That's Worth It podcast.
Thanks. I love talking to strangers.
Hopefully after this, we will not be strangers. But I would love to jump in and find out from you your origin story of Gender Fair.
Okay. Well, we can go way, way back to 2008. And that was the year that a lot of women won congressional seats and a lot of Democratic women won congressional seats. So I was writing a story at the time and I went to go look to see which industries funded them. There's a thing you have in open secrets. And I found there's, I could say, pharma or law. And can you guess which industries funded the women candidates that year who won?
No.
Okay. Well, I couldn't guess either, but guess what? None. So that's how this group called Open Secrets will put it in tranches. The major funding for women candidates were either Act Blue, which is basically a fundraising platform like GoFundMe or something like that. Not GoFundMe, or Emily's List. And so that was like the light bulb burst over my head. And I realized, oh my gosh, the reason why we don't have more women in Congress is because they are not outside of the funding mechanism of politics. So I realized what's really the problem, why we don't have what I want in America for women, the Equal Rights Amendment, it's under dispute whether we actually have it or not yet, is because we don't have enough money to be in Congress. And we don't have enough money to be in Congress because we're not taking enough money out of the corporate system. So that's where it actually came from back in 2008. And then later on, it sort of evolved. And then I started doing a news site. And then I realized actually, if I want to make change, I was doing a women's news site in the early 2010s. News doesn't really create things as much as I could do it with data. So data journalism is known to, one, create change, and two, have financial viability, which is, I know, a concern of yours. So if you look at the time, you look at Consumer Reports. Do you know that? I mean, people pay for consumer reports, or people pay for financial information. So it seemed to me I wanted to do feminist journalism, but I wanted to make sure it was sustainable. So that was why I chose to do data, because data will have more words than just
Well, content. Tell us about Gender Fair. What is that?
Okay, Gender Fair is, sometimes I explain it sort of like fair trade for women. We provide information to people about which companies serve women well, so they know which companies, nonprofits, and even colleges deserve their money. So the idea is that women have all this economic power in our culture, but we do not use it, right? Women are known to be, they say, the best, the most important consumers. But if you're the most important consumers, shouldn't you be asking the companies from which you buy to have women's leadership and provide parental leave and do equal pay studies and give back to the community of women and provide reproductive health care? And so that's what Gender Fair does. So Gender Fair is a measurement. We use it to measure companies on 5 categories that are based on the UN Women Empowerment Principles. So I didn't just make them up. These are sort of codified principles of the WEPs. And then we also chose which of those, where we could find a metric, sort of from SEC reporting or in CSR reporting. So it's basically a report card for women in companies, and they mostly do terribly. That's the sad thing.
Companies mostly do terribly.
Mostly do terribly, yes.
And universities you're also tracking, correct?
Yes, universities also, yeah. Women are not in leadership. There's not equal pay studies. We have so far to go. And I think that when you make a measurement, people can understand. A company might say, well, we do great by women. I've got a girl in marketing and we have mat leave on 6 weeks. Well, that's not enough. We're asking for sort of gender fairness to move throughout an organization to make it. And when that happens, it's good for everyone, right?
Yeah. Well, I would love to ask you about the name, and I appreciate that the word fair is in there, and it sort of takes away some of the controversy perhaps, but I would love to hear about your naming.
Interesting. Yeah. So originally I came up with a different idea. I can't remember. I was working with I'm just a journalist. I'm not a branding person, but I remember my first name was called Buy Up because I wanted to be sort of opposite of boycott. And that wasn't that great. And then somehow I was at TED Women. I remember I was talking to someone someone who runs I Fund Women, which is a great organization. And she said, scorecard needs to be something different, gender scorecard. And so for some reason, and then after that, I came up with gender fair. And I think fair is a word. You like the word fair, right?
What I appreciate about it is it takes out some of the feeling like somebody has to give up something, which may actually be the case. But when you're asking for something that's fair, then it feels reasonable.
Fair. I think actually, you're right on it, Georgie, because at the moment, in America, there's this terrible backlash against the words diversity, equity, and inclusion, which are all very nice words. My mother would have liked that very much. But fairness doesn't seem to elicit the same response. And I think so I'm happy to hear you say that. And I talk about that a lot, like even with my children, if people talk about equal pay, I was like, well, why do we have to be secret about pay? When I would cut pieces of cake for my children, I didn't give it to them under the table. They could see I was fairly cutting the pieces of cake the same size. So yeah, fairness is, I think, a very good word, and gender as opposed to women, because I don't think people want to hear the word women fair.
Yeah. I see this deep, long passion for you of interest in promoting the interest of women. And I talk about in my book, figuring out a contribution. That's something that's really important to you. And either with just one word, which could be woman, or a mission that is sort of, I help X, and why you're doing that and how are you doing it. And I wondered if you can share with me a little bit about how did you take a hold of women as something that you wanted to wrap your career around?
Well, it wasn't originally. That wasn't my life originally. But when I was 10 years old, I wrote a play called Men's Liberation. And I did it in my elementary school cafeteria. Like my great-great-grandmother was a suffragist. My grandmother was the first professor to teach at the University of Damascus. So I come from a line of women who were able to achieve thanks to, just privilege. But this was my passion since I was a kid. Women's rights were right on it since age 10. So that's why. And I worked in women's magazine a little bit. I didn't like them, but I worked in journalism for a long time. And I didn't get to this till later in life because and it was through also doing journalism, I realized that there was unfairness, more unfairness than I thought. I thought it was all done, right? I don't know. I'm much older than you are, but the year I graduated university was the first year that women were 50% of graduates.
Okay. And so you thought, all right, this is a non-issue.
Yeah, we've done it. So, some of my classmates went on to create companies like BlackRock or help take Google public, and they did great things. But when you look at, that's just a small percentage of the women of my generation. And we still didn't achieve equality. And it was actually, I don't know if you want to get into history or just more about how we got into building, but I used to review books, and I reviewed a book about women in the magazine industry. Reviewed a book by Naomi Wolf, and she did a byline count of women in the magazine industry. And women were like a small percentage of the top magazines where I always thought I'd work. And I realized, oh my gosh, it's very unlikely that I'm going to be working at the New Yorker. Very unlikely, like statistically improbable. And that was enough to actually deter me and realize, okay, I'll go work for women's magazines. Even though I'd already written books by that time. But yeah, I really didn't realize it wasn't fair. I hadn't cognitively appreciated that. So that's why I want to try to make things better for the women who come behind me and the women who aren't privileged to be white and middle class. That's gender fair is about that. We're not just about trying to get women in the C-suite. We're about trying to make things better for the lowest level workers in the American workforce.
Yeah. So accessibility for women in opportunities all throughout the workforce.
Mm-hmm. I mean, all the policies that we promote in the measurement of our app and our measurements would benefit all. Like if we count parental leave for baristas, not just the corporate people in a company. So, yeah.
And at a time like this, where we are in the US in a political time where DEI is, I'll say, being attacked, does that help your business in a way because it's more clear who are the right people for your product and service? Or how are you thinking about that?
I don't know. That's a really great question. And we're going to, everyone's sort of taken a beat in the last couple of weeks and trying to think of what to do next. I've always said that what I want to do is I want to create a consumer revolution of women, because I don't think that women have actually stood up enough in the marketplace to demand what they could demand. If the customer is really queen, the queen is taking paltry crumbs. So I think perhaps, I wish we didn't have to exist. I'm hoping that we can be a way for women and people to demonstrate that they believe in fairness for all, and they can do that in the marketplace, even if we're not maybe doing it politically. We can say we're going to buy from companies that support women and people of color, because that's also part of our measurements, right?
Yeah. Ideally politically and economically, but there's multiple avenues to show.
Policy is the most important. But even if you look at, I think that in the very long tail of things, we measure parental leave, and we grade companies on that. And eventually, because of course, America, we don't give that, every other country does. I think eventually, if the private sector is pushed to provide parental leave, eventually that'll move into the public realm and policy, because policy is really where you make change, right? That's more powerful.
If someone getting started in their career really wants to support women, wants to work in an environment that is supportive of women, what should they be looking at, and maybe where would they access your information?
The information for gender fair, or the information of where to work for women?
Both. Like if they are interested in a corporate environment that's very supportive of women.
Oh, well, that's great. Then if they want to do that, then look at the gender fair ratings or just call me and I'll tell you. We can't always tell you what the culture is at a company, but we can tell you when policies are in place. Like there's some companies that are that are credited as being gender fair, but we've heard that that's not really that positive for women, because you can't change the culture or all people. So look
or
at
there may be microcultures
within and certain. So it's very hard to de-bias or make a world fair when it's not really set up to be fair. But working for women's organizations now is very tricky. Back to the point, one of the points of your podcast is that there's very little funding, and the culture sort of says that women aren't important. Like with VC funding, women's companies get like 2% of VC funding. I'm sure you've heard all this. So without money, we can't really do much. But where women do have money is, again, in our consumer pocketbooks or our investments. So working for a women's nonprofit is not a very good deal at the moment. Like there's someone I know who says it's like the female funding Hunger Games. There's very little money to go around, and there's many organizations trying to get it to fix a lot of the problems for women, right? There's millions of problems. So nonprofits is not a great place to be right now for women's nonprofits. Is a hard place to be, but maybe someplace that does have a good gender program. If they're in the nonprofit sector or in the profit sector, find companies that have women in leadership. That often does create a difference. We can see that quite clearly, that a significant number of women in leadership, and not just one or two on the website, often changes the culture of a company.
Yeah. And can a consumer have access to your data?
Yes. There's a free app. I prefer that they pay for it. There's all more data on the paid app. We also list the companies that are gender fair on our website, and the app will tell you which brands are. So our app, you can scan a logo, and if it says Georgie, you'll go, oh, Georgie, it'll scan it, pull up the data. Oh yeah, Georgie is gender fair. It's part of the
okay, so you can use it for where you want to work, but you can use it for how you're shopping. And
yeah, absolutely. That was the major point of to show consumers which companies deserve their money, because most don't. And I'm hoping that, it's going to be a long game to exercise women's consumer power. I thought I could do it in 10 years, but it's probably a 30-year project.
Yeah. So you're betting on data to help you win this race of gender fairness.
A data plus action. Yeah. So there's a group called the Human Rights Campaign. They inspired my work. They do something called the Guide to Corporate Equality. And they started it, 20 years ago. It was just a simple survey. They sent it out to companies asking for the LGBTQ policies. And if a company didn't fill it out, they just got an F. And that was very motivating, and companies really did well. And I think now 800 companies performed well on this, and maybe 800 get a perfect score. It's like, it's great. So in my mind, why can't women do that? But we haven't made the same kinds of changes that HRC has. But there's one place where we do make change, and we're going to be moving to that in the coming year, as well as doing these databases on which I hope people act, because data is nothing unless you act on it. Is we also certify smaller businesses.
Okay, tell us about that.
Yeah, well, that's also great sort of economically. I think it'll help us do better even, is that Procter & Gamble, they support us, but they don't need to have gender fairs accreditation to make people buy their products. People know they're a good company. But sort of a smaller company might want to say that, look, we have great policies. We have women in leadership. We donate to the community of women. We're getting more calls from smaller businesses or smaller organizations that like this idea, because it's a shorthand to say that they're doing well. Like, we have a law firm that's been certified. It was the first law firm to get certified. Many years ago, Save the Children wanted to be certified gender fair, which is great because they met us the progress. So this, I think, will be a way for us to spread the idea through the culture and actually become even more economically viable.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I don't know if you have one or two examples you can share of sort of a tangible result from some of the work you've done that have, watching it, reading it, listening to it, you have felt, oh, this is why I'm doing this work.
Well, when I see companies, I can see all together we're part of a wave, that all this measurement, all this talking, people are aware, there will be measure on this. I can see companies making changes based on that. And I can also see in the smaller cases, I can see when a company will add something like this law firm. They were inspired. It's called Dorff, Nelson, and Zerauder in New York. And they were inspired to create scholarship for underrepresented women who were changing careers in law school. And that's like, I can see the people. I can see them on their website. And now one of them works as an associate in this firm. So that actually is one of my favorite stories. And I Save the Children, I think they added some people of color on their board, and they started adding supplier diversity. So we can get companies, when they do this measurement, to just start doing better or even communicating better. Sometimes we also, in our project on procurement with Salesforce and Logitech, they would make their vendors take the gender fair assessment. And so by that, they learned which policies people were watching. And I think that would change how they reported on it too. So they might say things privately. They may not publish things on their website, but maybe after being measured, then they actually are more likely to want to publicize things.
Yeah. And they can measure progress too. And so they know what they're tracking for.
Quite frankly, they don't care enough. They do not care enough about women. And I think that's why our work is even more important, as you say now, because I really want to make them care and show that they have to care, because it just can't be performative. And I think most women now, I can't say most women, but people do care about fairness.
I would love your take, Amy, on dealing with something systemic in society. And your biggest obstacle is a large obstacle, something that is difficult to overcome. How do you show up for work every day when it sometimes probably feels like David and Goliath, or like, how do you motivate?
That's such a great question. Sometimes not, but I have to believe that you can try little things. And you're right, you're absolutely right. Things are systemic. So how could I think that this little thing would change it, would make any change? But I think you can also think that you're part of a larger movement. Like when I started I started nearly 10 years ago. Since then, many similar things have started, like Gretchen Carlson would lift our voices. This using data sort of to show how women were doing in culture didn't really exist. But yeah, how do you motivate? That's a really hard. I think when I do get motivated, it's feeling part of the community, and women who are working for greater fairness in society. One time there was a Power Shift conference, there was a Power Up conference in San Francisco, and I met with all these people who were doing similar great work. And that felt great. Just know that we're not alone in this struggle, actually. That's the key thing. And I think unity is key when you're talking about trying to affect any change systemically, because as you're saying, it's pretty much impossible, isn't it? But
yeah. Okay. So collaboration, how does that play into what you do?
Well, it's great, because what I'm talking about is moving the collective voice of women in the marketplace. then the more we work with other organizations, the more we can do that. So we do partner with several other organizations that are working in fields like, Vote, Run, Lead, or the National Organization of Women was partnered with us on a thing last year. So this is maybe how we can have women act in concert, because there are so many, I would say, disaggregated communities of women. And when you're disaggregating and everyone's asking for different things, it's hard to make progress in any of them, right? I think that's one of the problems now. And I tried to work on this 10 years ago when I started my first news site. I was trying to gather together. I wanted to be a news source for women who followed all these different women's advocacy organizations. I didn't succeed. I only had a few partners. But in my mind, if you could aggregate that audience of women who care about women's fairness and progress in society, that's a big audience of people who care.
Yeah. In the book that I have coming out in April, I refer to, I think what you're talking about as a sphere of influence. And often like your business is a piece of it, but where you contribute is well beyond your business, but it's to a cause or solving a much bigger problem. But if you can grow the pie, that also does grow the business for you, which is good for you and ideally good for the world. And what I'm hearing from you is there's a calling for somebody who can bring all these organizations that have a similar mission together on a larger scale.
That's right. To action, to specific action.
To drive action.
And, I think the unity of, we're hoping to be working with something called the Black Dollar Index, which is run by a great person called Kelly Roselle. And she measures what we measure, but for Black community, very similar metrics to what we measure. And we're hoping to do something together this year, because together, if you add population of women and Black people, that's a lot of people.
Yeah. And also the clients probably for one are similar to the other.
Right. She's a nonprofit at the moment, I think. But yeah, actually, and back to the point of this podcast is, how do you do work and earn a living?
Making it worthwhile for you.
Right. Purposely, I decided not to have a nonprofit because I did not want to take money away from organizations that really need those funds, like Planned Parenthood among it. There's so many of them. So
that's the first time I've heard that as a motivation. Tell us more.
Well, we're a public benefit corporation. I don't do this to get rich, but because I really felt it was possible for the market to pay for this. So the market does pay for our work instead of donations.
Yeah, your clients are consumer or companies who get rated.
Companies that do well in the rating, yeah.
Well in the rating, yeah.
That can be objectively shown to do well. I mean, I'm not making that. There's a lot of pay-to-play stuff in this field now, too, which is all garbage. The best company for this, the best company for that. Like, they don't show their methodology. It's basically they pay for it. So that's diluted the field in a terrible way. And these are all publications owned by rich white guys.
Yeah, but so the fact that you're not a not-for-profit could potentially hurt that. But since you're a public benefit corporation, is the ethics behind it and fairness a big part of what you offer?
Right. I mean, that's
part of your product.
That's the raison d'etre, is to create social change. So public benefit corporations have no different tax status or something like that. It's just like, it's a public declaration. You apply for it. So we are registered as that. But I hope that I make millions and millions in coming years of extra profit so I can donate it to the organizations that are helping women in the field. That would be my ultimate goal.
Well, I love that you say that, Amy, because part of my mission is so many of the kind-hearted, really good humans that I meet end up playing really small in small organizations, small not-for-profits, and their voices are kept small. And how do we get those people into positions of leadership, and not only leadership, but to have the possibility to spend that money in places that matter? And so it's nice to hear that you are a fellow thinker along those lines.
Right. I mean, I'm still not right. I think the best is my CEO is a former corporate executive who worked for JP Morgan Chase, and my husband is a very successful entrepreneur. So they help me sort of see more the financial side of things. And I think it's very important to our culture measures things with money. So that's why it's important to try to earn money in whatever you do so it's valued. If you give away whatever you do, the culture doesn't consider it valuable.
What do you do to think bigger? What steps have you taken to allow yourself to not stay small?
Big. I think too big, Georgie.
That's not your problem?
No, actually. My problem is adjusting to systemic realities and I think my father, I think he has 3 daughters, a son too, who's nicer than the daughters. And we all have outsized confidence. Like the fact that this one woman thought I could like make a dent in these systemic issues of a capitalist system, which consistently throws women away and devalues them and keeps them far away from any power and money. It's like, I thought I could change. I didn't realize how bad it was actually. And yeah, and I'm just logical. So it seemed if the gay community can do that, women can do it too.
Yeah. And that outsized confidence, I mean, I think we often underestimate how our upbringing shapes us and helps us to be successful in what we choose. And having that outsized confidence, as you say, is a huge asset to what you do.
Right. But also my husband, I have to credit him. He's a genius. I love him. He made a lot of money. And he said to me something like, well, you either have power or you take power. Nobody gives it to you. And that actually helped me also come up with this idea of using women's economic power. I was like thinking about this, but I hadn't kind of figured it out.
I like that you say that. My equivalent of that is I don't like the word deserve because it feels very passive that you have to wait for it and something's going to come and fall in your lap because you deserve it.
You're going to be served it, right?
Versus you desire it. Or something you want to make happen. But I feel like deserve means that you are powerless.
Interesting. You know, since your book and what you're working on is about people finding purpose in their lives and meaning, like one thing I find all the time, we get contacted by people all the time who are like tired of the corporate life, especially women who get usually tossed out the window when they're 40, and they want to do something with some social good. I mean, if I had tons and tons of money, I could hire some of the best people ever. And because they often want to, after about 20 years in the regular workforce, women and men, but I would say more women, they really want to do something with some sort of social good. But the trick is, as you say, is paying for it. That's the very tricky trick.
And Amy, are there any books you recommend that young people may be interested in reading that support women?
Well, yes. Melinda Gates wrote this great book called A Moment of Lift. And of course, she's the major champion of women who's using her economic power to advance these issues, and so strongly. And there's no one we admire more than that. And then in the very last chapter, there are 6 things she lists to do to promote gender equality. And one of them is buying gender fair. So that's another reason why I would support that book. But to know that someone of her privilege and her power is now spending her entire life on fairness, that's quite inspiring to me. And so I think people might enjoy that book.
Yeah, wonderful advice. Thank you so much. Okay, this concept of 90,000 hours, the average career is 90,000 hours. You're talking about being at the later stage of your career. How are you so energized at this stage?
That there's so much work to do, really, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the culture doesn't care. Maybe I should just give up and play tennis. But, we have some great champions. And I have to say that the best champions of our work are men, because men have the power, like the CEO and the COO and the powerful male leadership at Logitech. Now it's actually a CEO is a woman. They supported this brilliant coalition for gender fair procurement that we launched a couple of years ago, which is actually much more massive than consumer dollars. And we have someone at Salesforce, a man who's very supportive, and same with our first P&G. And these usually men are the ones who have the money and the power to support our work. Ironically, it's not women in the workforce, because even executive women often don't have the power, or they don't want to be seen as complaining about women's issues. It makes them look bad in corporations. We've heard this from people.
That's amazing.
I know.
So it's so interesting because if from the outside, you would imagine that your best advocates would be women. But as you explain this, it makes so much sense, is currently the power sits with men, and women may be faulted for
exactly
pushing an agenda.
So it's like one company that we worked with once was Eli Lilly, which is a fabulously ethical company in many respects. And their CEO was the one who came up with this idea of looking into the experience of women in the workforce. And he spent like $1 million to interview women employees and find out what they thought. And then he played back their texts with video actors, and it moved the male executives in the company so much that they changed a lot of policies. So back to talking with other people and storytelling, this is how you create change. It's probably not just by saying women are only 14% of the top paid executive women. And that's probably not it. It's when you hear a narrative of a woman executive in your company who had her hair someone asked to touch her hair. when she's in a big meeting. That's going to be more powerful than citing statistics.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not only data plus action, it's data plus action plus storytelling is the secret sauce to
right. Yeah. I think maybe the storytelling is what makes people take action, because data itself is nothing. And there's a lot of data. But we have to inspire people to take action that's meaningful. And right now I'm hoping that I can provide people some action they can take that makes them feel like a little bit they're making a vote somewhere. And I'm not going to give you my money if you're not treating your workers right.
Yeah. Yeah. Last words of wisdom for men or women wanting to start off in their career supporting women.
Just be fair in all that you do. Like try to when you're working, we do have biases all the time. Like my children used to point out that I even have sexist biases, and I thought I was a perfect feminist. So I think we all have to try to do better and think of others who don't have our privileges and try to bring everyone up. There was that great saying in the civil rights movement, lift as you rise. And I think those are great words for all of us, is that if we just think of ourselves in the workplace or in our own personal lives, we just have one happy self. But if we, lend our hand out to someone else, we have two happier people.
Amy, thank you so much for being on the show. And I really appreciate you taking time to shine the light on this really important topic. And thank you for being here.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to seeing your book and seeing how you can inspire people to merge their passion with their purpose.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Here's my hot take on this conversation with Amy. The first is about this power paradox. One of the most surprising revelations that she shared with me was that men, not women, are the strongest champions of gender affairs work. As Amy explained, this is because men currently hold the positions of power in corporations, while executive women often hesitate to advocate for women's issues to avoid being seen as pushing an agenda. This highlights the complex dynamics of creating change from within existing power structures. The second is her decision to stay away from a not-for-profit business model. Amy's decision to structure Gender Fair as a public benefit corporation rather than not-for-profit was particularly interesting to me. Her reasoning was twofold: to avoid competing for limited not-for-profit funding with organizations like Planned Parenthood, and because she believes that what isn't valued monetarily in our culture isn't valued at all. And this challenges the common assumption that social impact work must be not-for-profit. And that's a wrap for today's episode of Work That's Worth It. Remember, every conversation we share is designed to empower you to build a career that's truly worth your time and energy. There are future disruptors out there just like you who would appreciate the conversations in this podcast. Please support me by spreading the word and sharing this episode with a friend or two, or visit my website at georgieenthoven.com. That's spelled GeorgieEnthoven.com. Until next time, ask yourself, what problems am I solving, and are they worth my valuable time? Your intentional choices today can lead to exponential impact tomorrow. Thanks for listening.